Hi, everybody, and welcome to Global Impact, the show that connects the dots so you don't have to. It's been a year that we haven't been online, and we'll tackle all this in a other episode. We'll explain why we took a break that long, but here we are again. So, Michael, what's new? You are right now in Odessa. We can see people in the background walking. It's been quite heated. Can you tell us more about the situation in Ukraine?
So as you can see, I'm in Odessa right now, Melissa, and it's been a tumultuous time. This has been my temporary home for the past 6-7 months already. And just behind me is Catherine Square, Kateryńska Plощa. And just early yesterday morning, on the other side of the square, one of the 2 or 3, actually it was one of 19 Russian missiles that came this way hit. So one hit the big Orthodox cathedral, the other hit just behind me. So this is the kind of the start of the historic district. And thanks to the owners of this restaurant, Dizengoff, this is my kind of home away from home. It's my office, but what gave us the sense yesterday that the war is coming closer is that just next door, already glass started raining down onto the sidewalk in the middle of the night. So when everyone came here in the morning, they were shocked to see all the devastation. And further behind,
the cathedral that has been hit or was in the 1990s, I think.
Yeah. So in 1936, it was destroyed by Stalin's forces. Yeah. It was established in the late 1700s, a very old, the main Orthodox cathedral in Odessa, and 10-minute walk from here. But really, the other big stuff was literally right behind me. So we all feel right now that war has come a lot closer to us.
Right. Well, we'll tackle that in another. We'll have updates on the Ukraine situation. But today we have a special guest. It's going to be our first one on the new season. I don't even know which season we're on anymore. I think we're going to have to start from scratch. It's a relaunch. And so she's a friend of yours. And would you like to tell us more about our guest?
Sure. So Laura Bauman first came to my attention when I saw her on CNN, and I think I saw her on Fox, and she started really popping up with this authoritative voice on what's going on in Ukraine, but specifically Russia's attempts to eradicate the Ukrainian culture through theft of artifacts, of destruction of museums. Laura Bauman used to be based right here in Ukraine, and she used to work and comment for a number of pretty prestigious outlets, among them CNN, Newsweek, the Associated Press, and The Economist. And, there's often a joke, Melissa, that journalists can make good spies or the other way around. So she indeed did go on to enter the covert business, if we can call it that. She went to become an operations officer for the Central Intelligence Agency, served nearly 2 decades.
That's CIA, by the way.
CIA, yeah.
Word just means better.
Yeah.
The CIA.
Nearly 2 decades undercover first as an overseas CIA clandestine operations officer, and later in the counterintelligence division, and then chief
at the FBI. And then she worked for the FBI, which is
okay, chief for the Department of Energy. And then she also served a tour leading intelligence for the FBI's International Art Crime Team, which investigates felony art forgeries, theft, smuggling, and illegal financial schemes. So now she's based in Washington, D.C., where she advises governments and private clients on risk management, promoting democratic values, widely sought after speaker. In fact, I can tell you that she was a speaker at our recently concluded Ukrainian Journalist Conference in New York City, Ukrainian Institute of America, and spoke was one of the...
Which I was supposed to join,
That's right, you were,
Where was my
flight? And Yeah, she does. She's an author on foreign policy and a whole bunch of other issues.
Right.
And regularly now again on CNN, Fox, Bloomberg, and other channels. So pretty familiar face. Someone who, if you see her on stage, she's just full of life and really has a good grasp on issues of the day.
Well, I got really excited when you mentioned her, and I was like, oh, I have so many questions for her, and I'm sure our audience as well, will benefit from hearing her story and her work. It's very unusual. Her path is very unique, and yes, she's the epitome of that kind of cultured, intelligent, elegant, undercover CIA, FBI, the type of character we found usually in Hollywood shows, but she's the real thing. So we're going to cover a lot, but I'm very excited.
Didn't you once neutralize a male opponent in one of the films you did in Europe?
I did. I actually did play a spy. So I forgot about that. You've been digging about it right now.
Yeah, yes, it was like after I saw the video clip, I wouldn't want to bump into you in a dark alley, I'm telling you.
It was lucky number 4. It was my first movie when I graduated from the British Drama School I went to. And we filmed that in Prague. And yes, I was a double agent.
Wasn't there a romantic affair that went wrong? Something like that as well?
A shadow that isn't mine. If one hair on my neck so much as stiffens, I'll end you. It's over. What?
To the core. We always do. Who's next?
Oh yes. Oh yes. As usual, there's always a romantic affair that goes wrong in movies. Actually, we can ask her about that as well, because there's so much that it's so fascinating, the whole spying and undercover and double life and how that affects also.
Yeah, like, a lot of mystique around it.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystique, as you said. And yes. So anyhow, I think she's here. But you started as a journalist, right? And then you ended up in the CIA. So can you tell us your story? How did you end up?
Sure.
Yeah. How did you end up a journalist and then an agent for the CIA?
Sure. Just a word on terminology. So the CIA and MI6 and nation state, and then the DGSE, although I guess it has a new acronym, all refer to intelligence officers, right, as the official spies, if you will, and then agents are the people we recruit. Gotcha. So it's different from law enforcement. Say an FBI agent is the one who works for the FBI, and then they use confidential human sources to refer to people they recruit. Anyway, but for the purposes of this conversation, let's just go with the word spy. It's easier.
Okay, it's more exciting too. Hopefully, we won't be canceled on YouTube. But...
Yeah, hopefully. Well, you never know.
So, you're a spy?
No, I used to be. Okay, I mean, this is a unique aspect of the American and the Western, I think, democracies compared to, say, Russia. In Russia, once you're in the security services, you're there forever, and even if you try to leave, you're not really allowed to leave. Whereas in the United States and other democracies, you leave, and that's a huge, huge difference. From the time I was in high school, I wanted to be a journalist. So I worked on student newspapers. Then, I worked for Newsweek for a while, filling in, first as an intern and then filling in for people who were on maternity leave. And then I ended up going overseas as a freelancer to Ukraine. because I really wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And so I worked as a foreign correspondent for a couple of years, ended up going back to the States, worked for CNN and the Associated Press, etc. And then, well, let me back up. I was actually in Crimea covering a partnership for peace exercise. And I asked a question that I thought was perfectly appropriate. And this polite Marine said, excuse me, ma'am, is this the first time you've covered Marines? And I realized maybe I had a little bit more to learn about geopolitics and the military, etc. So I decided when I came back to the States to apply to graduate school to study international security policy. I went to Columbia for that, to the School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA. And while I was there, the CIA was recruiting for analysts. I knew so little about espionage or the tradecraft of intelligence that I raised my hand at this information session and I said, what do you call the people who, go out into the field and get the information? And everyone in unison turned to me and said, an operations officer. And I said, oh, that's what I want to be. In my mind, I likened it to the difference between being a reporter and being an editor. Both are incredibly important roles, but at that point in my life, I couldn't imagine sitting at a desk all day. That was not, but there are a lot of similarities in terms of the skill set and the motivations of, I would say, of at least I can speak for American journalists and spies. And that is, you have to have really good people skills because, you need to develop, you need to cultivate those sources who will share with you things that, it's dangerous for them to share the truth, whether it's with a journalist or a spy. And but both spies and journalists have a penchant for the truth. They want to find the truth and they want to speak truth to power. Now, the audiences are obviously slightly different in that when you publish something on the front of the New York Times, everyone and anyone reads it. When you write a report for the CIA, it's going to a very select group of policymakers, decision makers. But those motivations are similar. I would say personalities, although are similar too. I mean, sure, there's room for introverts, extroverts, but again, that motivation of wanting to pursue the truth, being strong writers, you have to be a strong writer to be an effective intelligence officer, at least in this day and age. The other thing is you really want to make an I would say most journalists and most spies aren't in it for the money. I mean, it's not like you're working for a hedge fund in either discipline. I mean, yes, there are some independently wealthy intelligence officers that come with family money or something, but you're certainly not, or have a spouse that makes a lot of money, but you're not going to get rich working for the government. And likewise with journalists, there are some that make a ton of money, but in general, it's relatively modest compared to, say,
vocational. It's more vocational and passion driven than
exactly.
So what's the actual, if you want to become a spy for the CIA, for instance, what are the actual qualities, especially for a woman? What are the requirements that you would need to have to be successful as a
I would say you have to have insatiable curiosity. You have to be able to discern. You have to have strong discernment in terms of what people are telling you. You need to be a critical thinker. You have to have impeccable morals, I would say. And by morals, I don't mean I don't smoke, don't drink, don't rock and roll. I mean more of, there's surprisingly little lying as a professional intelligence officer. Yes, you may have to assume a different facade or a different name for particular projects, but you better be rigorously honest with the people you work with, and you better follow the rules. And if you don't, or if you make a mistake, you better report it. And that's because, you know, you're trusted with so much responsibility. I always say spies have to be like a surgeon. You have to be as confident as a surgeon that you can save someone's life, but not so cocky that you get them killed. If that makes sense. So I would say you have to be both a good team player and very competent on your own and trustworthy. In terms of being a woman, I actually think I don't think it's particularly different whether you're a man or a woman. Certainly
the training is the same.
Training's exactly the same. You train together. Certainly the world of espionage has, particularly since there have been professional services, let's say post World War II, the culture has been defined by men in general, because as with all professions, say other than teaching or nursing, it was open to men first and women later. I once was talking to a colleague, a very senior colleague, and I said something about as a female case officer, and he said, "Whoa, stop. You're an officer. Whether you are a woman or a man is irrelevant." And he was absolutely right. There are some, what you see in the movies, you don't sleep with targets. You don't, as a matter of fact, you get fired for that. That is absolutely verboten.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe the biggest challenge as a woman, if you're trying to cultivate a relationship with a man and target, and the same thing if you're a man trying to cultivate a potential source who is a woman, you have to make sure that the person doesn't mistake your interest in them as romance. And that is, I don't know that there's an actual recipe for that, except that depending on what culture the person you're talking to comes from, you have to sort of adjust.
So yes, I hear what you're saying, but there's been like you take the case of Mata Hari. Was actually, I mean, that's a bit of an
that was way before. I mean, that was back in the day. I mean, that is highly unusual. I mean, I'll say, sure, the Russians and the Chinese run what we call honeypots, but the Western democracies.
That's not the norm. That's just an exception. And okay, gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Michael, would you like to jump into the Ukraine situation?
Yes. What a fascinating conversation, especially similarities between journalists.
We'll get back into this. We'll get back.
Yeah, and a bit of context. Excuse the background noise, people walking behind me. So I am in Odessa, on the main square here, and because of the security situation, I've come to Dizengoff restaurant where I know it's safe and they have reliable internet. So a bit of context there. Laura, something you said really caught my interest. In certain jurisdictions, once you're a spy for life.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we thought of the same person, certain Vladimir Putin.
Right.
He worked in East Germany, started basically his spy career there. His background, what as a spy, what can we discern from that, or what should we look out for in terms of what his current or future actions might be in terms of Ukraine and beyond because of where he came from?
Well, I would say he's a product not only of the security services of the FSB or for the KGB, but he is a product of the security services at a time that the Soviet Union was incredibly powerful. And as he's written and said numerous times, he wants to restore that. And I can, I don't agree with what he wants to do, but if I put myself in his head and I think, how would I feel as a former CIA officer if the United States, God forbid, broke apart? My patriotism, my loyalty, my belief in America would want to restore that. Now, I think the United States has the moral high road compared to the Soviet Union for obvious reasons. I think we probably all three agree with that. But so I try to put myself in his head, and I think that, if he, God forbid, and I don't think he will win in Ukraine, but if he were to, I don't think he'd stop. I think he'd continue going. I also, if you look at the people around him, I mean, he has certainly the people he trusts, he knew from St. Petersburg. I mean, even, and that sort of makes sense. I don't know what you two think, but when I think back on people that I knew that I've known since I was younger, since I was, first started in journalism, and then after that, as a junior officer, certainly those are people I trust because I've known them for so long. I do think one of the things about Vladimir Putin is that is directly related to his time in the KGB is that he's ruthless. I mean, the KGB from my perspective, did not exhibit the same morals that keep Western security services within guardrails. They're an unchecked power that, went after internal and external enemies. And I'll stop there. So I think we see this reflected in Vladimir Putin's personality and how it goes.
Yeah. Now, you've talked a heck of a lot about a certain aspect of the Ukraine war, and that's the cultural theft, cultural destruction, Russia's attempts to pretty much what looks to us a complete eradication of the Ukrainian culture. And in the New York Times, they've documented in very great detail how Russia has looted tens of thousands of pieces, including avant-garde oil paintings, gold. And experts quoted in the New York Times call it the biggest art heist since Nazis in World War II. Is that an exaggeration, or is that pretty close to the truth?
That is absolutely accurate. As a matter of fact, I wrote the same thing at the beginning of the war after only a few months, back in 2022. It was already starting. I mean, this is Russia's targeting of Ukrainian cultural property and cultural heritage constitutes cultural genocide. And I say that as someone who has studied this and worked in this space for a long time. At one point in my career, I ran intelligence for the FBI art crime team. The head of the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg has been quoted in the art newspaper, which is essentially the most important trade publication in the international art market. He has said, referring to the war in Ukraine, quote, "No one can stop us." Okay, well, there you go. The head of the Russian Historical Society also sits on Vladimir Putin's War Council for Ukraine. We have satellite imagery and eyewitness accounts of organized military looting of museums in occupied territories. We've seen museums, for example, there's a famous folk art museum about an hour east of Kyiv that the Russians, literally burned down. Nothing else around that was burned. It was set on fire, arson. I mean, and again, I've seen the video of that. To be clear, I did not see the person actually set fire to it, but I saw the burning building, and eyewitnesses accounts say that it was Russian. So those are some of the facts. Also, this is and I mean, if we think of the history of the Soviet Union and going back to who Vladimir Putin is, there is Moscow, there is Russian culture, and everything else in the former Soviet Union was either Russian or irrelevant. And so, recently I was actually invited. It was a great honor to give a lecture to a group of visiting museum and cultural heritage professionals from Central Asia. They were here for a State Department program. So I delivered a lecture on crime in the art market, cultural heritage, issues of repatriation. And one of the things I was really, that I really pressed is that cultural professionals and security services in their own countries need to communicate, not in a Soviet style where the security services came in and just either destroyed a culture the way the Russians are trying to do to Ukraine right now, but in that if people want to repatriate objects that have been stolen, for example, Ukrainian paintings that are now being smuggled, well, hardly smuggled, I mean, just outright stolen and put on trucks and taken to either occupied Crimea or to Russia. In the international sort of regime and system that runs this, for example, the FBI needs a police report. So if museum professionals don't communicate with their police, their security services, then they're not going to get their objects back if they're, for example, in the United States. And sometimes culturally, that's a hard bridge, to forge.
I have to be honest with you, walking around today, Odessa, looking at the destruction, I was thinking about this conversation we're going to have. And I think the overwhelming feeling here is that words of condemnation aren't going to make a big difference anymore when it comes to the Kremlin's future actions. There's a lot of worry here that they're going to continue what they're doing. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but what is the answer in terms of pushing them back and in terms of stopping this destruction, this theft, this killing? Because none of us really feel that anymore. Is that, like a big statement came out from UNESCO today as well on what's going on here in Odessa. So what would be the way to push them back?
Okay, let me try to answer this a couple different ways. One, I think we would all agree that Ukraine needs some of the more advanced weapons sooner rather than later. And we're all aware of the production challenges, the training challenges. They're coming, but they haven't come fast enough. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of specifically cultural objects, one of the challenges is Russia still sits on the Security Council. And so unfortunately, a lot of, great condemnation at the UN, but it's not a perfect system. It's better than nothing, but it obviously presents a huge challenge in this realm. I will say from a US perspective, immediately when the Russians invaded, sort of a coalition of the willing in the United States, the Smithsonian, private museums, the State Department, etc., scholars came together to send material, like physical packing material, as quickly as possible, also to Ukraine to cover statues and to wrap paintings to put in safe, in hiding, but also conducted online or via Zoom training. And the United States has a lot of experience in this realm for two reasons. One, starting in World War II, there's a unit called it was called the Monuments Men. Now it's the Monuments Men and Women, going back to the Melissa, to the earlier question about the gender issue. And this group, this unit, it's now out of Fort Liberty, which used to be Fort Bragg for those who are following the changing names of military facilities in the United States. They basically recovered objects that the Nazis had stolen. And I mean, tens of thousands, actually hundreds of thousands, approximately 600,000 were stolen. Approximately 100,000 are still missing. So, they did a great job, and that unit has continued. It was in smaller form, and I don't know the exact staffing, but I know that it was smaller until after the Baghdad Museum was looted. I don't know how familiar you are with that. Yeah, for listeners out there, in 2003, after the United States-led coalition occupied Iraq, the Baghdad Museum, which held some of the most, not just Iraqi treasures, but World Heritage treasures, it was looted. While it was looted, US troops stood across the street and watched, because their orders were to protect the Ministry of Oil, which was across the street. And the looting was a combination of professional looters. I mean, some actually had quote unquote shopping lists, as well as just, a mob, people angry, people, a combination. We've all spent time, and anyone who's spent time in war zones knows that there's chaos and at various times. So that's what happened. The United States received a huge black eye because of this. It was, internationally condemned. How could we do that? And as a result, the US government, across agencies, from the Pentagon to the State Department to the Smithsonian, the FBI, came together and figured out, okay, we can't do this again. So, let this happen again. Part of our moral leadership in the world as a democracy is to protect people, number one, but also to protect cultural heritage that is the essence, the identity of a people. It would be like if someone from an American context destroyed or bombed the Statue of Liberty, or in France, set the Eiffel Tower or the L'Arc de Triomphe on fire. I mean, these are powerful symbols.
We've been talking about culture and arts, and
Yes.
so let's go back into that, but in a more lighter way, because so I've been in Hollywood for 10 years, and I read many scripts you can imagine, based on CIA. I read actually role for to be a special agent, everything.
Yeah.
I always wondered how a real agent or a person who works at the CIA or is a spy would what perception do they have of Hollywood productions
it depends on the obviously it depends on the show,
on the
production.
I'm gonna go into your favorite movies later on.
Okay, all right, we'll get it. You know what I like about the Bourne Identity series is that, well, there's one scene that I really like where the protagonist walks into a hotel lobby and he has to calculate in his mind how many steps it's going to take him, how long it's going to take him to get from the front door to the front desk. Yeah, and that's actually one of the most realistic things I saw, because everything has to be timed correctly, whether it's to keep your agent safe or whether it's to show up at a certain point in time, so that I thought was realistic. For some reason, spies in Hollywood never have to do accounting or paperwork. And let me tell you, that is not true. I would like to
do it before. When we have to read scripts, learn lines.
Okay.
Paperwork.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say the adrenaline. Certainly, there's an adrenaline to being a spy. There's also adrenaline. I imagine being an actor that there's adrenaline to that, and there's adrenaline to being a journalist, whether you're doing a live stand-up or whether you are going someplace that others can't go. I mean, actually, there is another similarity between journalists and spies. I always knew that I was someone who was willing to go where some other people wouldn't go. I mean, I studied in Africa and spent months eating out of a common bowl with my hands. You know, that's not for sort of
it's unusual.
For a college girl from, you know,
Yeah.
the Midwest, that's unusual. So
well, it's interesting because we had a war reporter, actually, Janine Di Giovanni, on the show, and she's I don't know if you've heard of her.
I didn't see that one. Okay.
And she's fascinating. She wrote a lot of books about her journey in different wars. She was covering wars for 30 years and survived.
Wow.
Which is unusual as a female as well. So we talked a lot about this. And so my question for you is, just let's go back into being a woman within this field of work. I think, especially because you started, when did you join the CIA? Was it like in the 90s or?
It was before 9/11. It was after
9/11, right?
Yeah.
So that was a time where already, I mean, women at work, it was a different place then than it is now.
But I will say, when I joined the CIA, there were very few women in senior operational positions. I would say it was my generation that has really changed that, and now there are many women in senior positions. You know, like being a war correspondent, I think one of the challenges for women is that women are the ones who have the babies. So men don't have the babies. I mean, you know, they can still be fathers, but they're not the ones who for 9 months are who have that physical job. And I worked with women actually, when I was in Afghanistan, I worked with a woman who was several months pregnant, and she, you know, was fine. The embassy was still there, so she had some, you know, health care, etc. But I would say those are calculations that men don't have to make. Certainly they have to make calculations of that, you know, how do they relate to building a family? Do they want a family? And you know, all of those issues, which are complicated even when you live in, I don't know, Cincinnati and you're figuring out your life. But it is much more complicated when you're overseas and you're moving and you have a job that might not be conducive to your spouse's job.
We had that conversation with Janine, and she had a child and still managed to do it. And she was also, her partner as well was a war reporter. So very difficult situation. But so I think it's interesting because you worked at the CIA and then FBI. It's two different places,
totally different cultures.
I was in competition, right? I mean, I hear they're in competition with each other. So what's your
So I actually went from CIA. I ran a counterintelligence division at the Department of Energy. And so the FBI was actually just a tour for a couple of years, because through agencies you can loan people out. I would say that I shouldn't say loan people out, but you can rotate, and it's actually helpful from a systemic federal government perspective, because you get to know how other agencies work, you build relationships, etc. And as you said, most institutions in most governments have some sort of competition with one another. I mean, that is classic. I would say the cultures are disparate in several ways between the FBI and CIA. I mean, FBI is law enforcement. Everything is black and white. You either broke the law or you didn't break the law. Okay. And the CIA is, you have to see shades of gray. I mean, and also the CIA is staffed by people who move around other cultures, who are global in perspective. Even if from a clearly pro-American perspective, they see the United States in context of the rest of the world and working with allies, etc. Whereas the FBI, well, they do have some people who go overseas, and work with Interpol and their counterparts. It is domestic focused, and it's a different mentality. From my perspective, the FBI is much more male dominated in terms of its culture.
Oh, interesting. I
Extremely.
would have thought the opposite, actually.
No, not at all.
Wow.
Not at all.
Okay. And so
It's in my experience.
from your experience, yeah. But I mean, it's one more experience, to add to. But so in the FBI, you were in the art theft. You were in that division, right?
Yeah.
Investigating art thefts, etc. And
So
there's a movie.
thefts, forgeries, frauds, repatriations, all of those.
Repatriation. So there's a movie. I'm sure you know what I'm gonna say.
Which
Thomas
one?
Crown Affair.
Oh yes,
My favorite. That's my favorite.
Where is my Pierce Brosnan?
Oh, that's good.
Oh, yes. Do we know each other?
Not yet. I'm Catherine Banning.
And whose head are you after?
Yours. Do you really think I'm going to sleep with the man I'm investigating?
That's what I want. Brosnan.
I mean, James Bond was in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I really liked that movie. I thought it's been years since I saw it, but I loved the hats and I thought it was.
So that whole scene at the end, this whole. So what did you think of that scene? Was it smart? Was it well done? I mean, I thought
it was smart.
Yeah.
And look, art thieves are a unique breed in my experience. As are art forgers. It is, there's a joke that, it's the dumb criminals that get caught. I don't know that I believe that wholeheartedly. I will say that art theft in general, art forgery takes planning, it takes an amount of intelligence, and there's certainly, I would say, look, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but my lay person, none of them have to be psychopaths. No, or sociopaths, sorry, not psychopaths, because psychopaths are violent. Sociopaths, very meticulous, and
certain kind of breed, as you said.
Yeah. They have to want to. They have to want to move around in sort of a high society, which is very different from a carjacking.
Right.
They're both criminal acts. They both have victims. But it's a different style, if you will.
Oh, this must go over.
With whom?
Whomever you bring here.
I never bring anyone here.
The other thing is, and I'm not saying this to praise art criminals at all. They actually do
not work out, considering the work you were doing.
They actually do hurt people. I know one case where a teacher of modest means invested his entire life savings and retirement in investing what he thought were Jackson Pollock paintings. Turns out they were all fake. So there are real victims. Yeah. It is at the high end of the market, one of the ways that criminals get away with their crimes is that victims often don't want to admit that they've been taken. So there was a real sea change in this with what's called the Knoedler case. The Knoedler was the oldest, most venerable art gallery on the Upper East Side in New York. And it closed after selling a series of fakes, including a fake $8.4 million Rothko to the then chairman of Sotheby's. So if someone with that sophisticated of an understanding of the art market and experts can be taken, imagine the rest of us.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So
That's like
that said, let me say there's a lot of legitimate trade in the art market. It's at least a $67 billion trade a year. I'd say like bankers, the vast majority of people in the market are honest. It's just, you know, there's few that aren't, that give it a bad rap.
Well, Laura, what's your favorite spy movie or criminal movie ever?
Well, actually, so could I alter that slightly? My favorite miniseries or show on espionage is French. In English, it's the Bureau, so maybe it's Le Bureau in French. I don't know. Yeah, it came out during COVID, so I binged it. It is about the DGSE, and it is, the reason I like it is the inter-office politics are accurate. The operations, the operational specificity is as close to anything I've seen on TV that's, you know, as close to real life. I will say the escape from ISIS, a little questionable. I mean, want people to, but that was maybe
Spice it up in movies and TV shows.
yeah. But I would highly recommend that.
Okay.
The Americans, aside from the violence and gratuitous sex, the actual psychology, particularly between the husband and wife, I found compelling. And for those of us who have worked in that space, the ending of it, it absolutely had to either go that way, or there were only two ways it could go, and I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it.
But it's a good one to watch.
Yeah, that's really good.
Well, talking about personal, just a question came up right now. I don't know your personal situation, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but how was it like with a partner, you being a spy? I mean, how much can you share with your partner? Do they know anything about your work? How easy or hard is it to conduct a
And do you have to resist talking in your sleep? Just kidding.
Yes, something like that.
I was single most of the time
Wow.
that I was working in that space. I'd say that it's lonely. It could be very lonely. Yeah, that's why your camaraderie with your colleagues is so important. I think there are, that's complicated, very complicated. You have to have quite a tolerant spouse or partner to say, I'm going away for 10 days. I look forward to seeing you. And you don't tell them where you're going.
Yeah.
And you have no communication. I mean, you really have to have somebody who is special. Is independent, you have to have a tight relation. You have to have trust for sure.
Yeah. Can you date like another spy, or it's not allowed?
No, you can date. You can
date each other. Okay.
In the Netflix series The Diplomat, if you haven't watched it, watch it.
I have.
There's an interesting scenario there. The CIA chief of station in London is dating, I think, the number 2 at the embassy, and there are a lot of interesting scenarios there about information sharing or not, things like that.
Yes, well, exactly. And I would say, you know, at the beginning of our conversation, I was talking about really the importance of integrity for a spy, and so that extends to, there's some things that you cannot share with your loved one because you have a higher responsibility to protecting your sources, to protecting whatever the mission is. And so, you know, there are a lot of, and that's, you know, when you're a spy, you think about your assets 24/7, and you don't think about yourself. You have to keep people safe. And yeah, and part of that is no pillow talk.
If I can jump in, I think I might have told you one of the first times we talked, Laura, that I used to know the former CIA station chief in Moscow, Bob Fulton. Fortunately,
Yeah.
he's not around with us anymore. But he, when I was working as a journalist, but we became friends. Yeah, he once took me to a dinner in some obscure Vietnamese restaurant in McLean, Virginia, with these other colleagues.
Yeah.
I had no clue they were CIA operatives or people
Right.
of that level.
Yeah.
And it is, I guess that's kind of the part of the job is the incognito aspect of it,
Well, there's
or just looking normal,
absolutely. There's a cognitive dissonance that you have to maintain all the time. And, and the good thing about spies is they're engaged in the world. So you usually have an interesting conversation. And typically they're people. Right? Yeah. I mean, they like people. And again, the combination, it's, I think, natural that journalists and spies, they share so many interests, but there is that line, even if someone is in the service and you're friends with them and they're journalists, vice versa. I having been a journalist before I joined the intelligence world, for many, many years, my former colleagues didn't know, but once my cover was rolled back and now, which happened before I left the Department of Energy. So I was a counterintelligence director. None of my journalist friends ever tried to get me to talk out of school, in part because we'd known each other for so long and they knew that was a non-starter. That would have ruined our friendship.
Laura, putting on your geopolitical analyst hat, the next 6 months or into next year, aside from Ukraine, what else will you be keeping your eye on in terms of conflicts or climate or things like that are really going to keep your attention?
What happens with the former rebranded, maybe still named Wagner Group in Africa and the Middle East? Looking at China's rise in the Middle East, I think that's really one of the most important issues right now. Looking at what happens internally with Israel, which we're all watching this week, and how that's going to influence the region. Iran, again, it goes back to Ukraine, with Iran providing drones to Russia, etc. And then with China brokering, I'd still call them conversations between Saudi and Iran. That's really unusual. So we'll be watching that. So Asia, Taiwan, Europe, Africa, that's where my focus is. But that then raises the question, what about Latin America? And that's not my area of expertise, but whenever the world is focused on one region, that allows instability to grow in another.
Interconnected. Yeah. Usually is all connected in a way.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Two other things I've been obsessed with recently, rare earth minerals, that competition, we all need to focus on that, and the technological race with China. I mean, we need, and when I say we on this, I'm not just talking about the United States. I'm talking about all democracies in the world. We really need to make sure that we maintain asymmetric advantage.
Right. I have just a little question before because we've been on air for quite a long time. We don't want to take all your day.
No,
but talking about China, I saw a lot of your interviews with Fox, and you've been talking a lot about China. And there's one little question, and I think it's because my audience is very young. I have a lot of Z generation people following me, and they're all on TikTok.
Yes.
Right. So here's the deal. I mean, it's been banned in June this year. I mean, a lot of federal actual workers and certain states banned it from government and workers. And so what's your take on this? Are we shooting ourselves in the foot by allowing China to invade us, especially on the social media platform where it has a lot of influence on the young people. And they're not doing the same for us because their TikTok is very different from ours.
Yes.
Would you like
Yes,
to-
I think we are. I totally agree with that.
Right.
You know, I would like to see China lift censorship of Google and American social media. It is, how can I say this? Well, first of all, in terms of banning TikTok from government devices, any employer can do that. You have a government device, you lose your privacy on that device. Get your own device with your own TikTok if you really want that badly enough. One of the things that's hard to explain to people outside of espionage, who don't work in espionage, and especially younger generation that grew up with, phones in their hands from the time, they were kids and their parents wanted to distract them for a minute, right? To explain that there can be malign influence, it's very challenging. One of the things, actually, Michael when we were at that conference in New York about disinformation and journalism in Ukraine, one of the most fascinating things I learned was about a Scandinavian country that is teaching critical thinking in terms of social media, etc., from a young age. It's part of the curriculum. That's something I think that would be incredibly helpful in every country. Whether your tradecraft is espionage, acting, journalism, the three of us, based on our backgrounds and our training, probably see things slightly different from other people. For example, when an actor watches TV, I remember this when I worked at CNN, I'd watch the news and I'd see the technical mistake. I mean, now as a civilian watching movies, I don't see the mistake. I don't see the repeat, the coffee cup in the scene that shouldn't be there from a crew or whatever it is, right? I just, as people who have not worked in journalism, they may not see the apostrophe should be plural possessive instead of single possessive. They may not see that the lead is buried. From an espionage perspective, I understand how something like TikTok can be used not only to influence, but to suck up data. And if you haven't seen the way firsthand, the way a piece of technology can steal everything immediately, it's hard to believe. It's like one day I was walking in a European city and I saw a brush pass. I don't know if you know it. So for your audience, if they don't know what a brush pass is, it's essentially when two people are passing something secret, a document, they walk next to each other. And I mean, you see it in Hollywood, right? And they pass it from hand to hand. I guess drug dealers probably do the same thing. But I saw it in front of my eyes. Lots of other people are around. I bet nobody else saw it. I only saw it because
the background. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Well done.
Thanks. I was sort of amazed.
The question here is what did you do about it?
Nothing. I just walked on by. I thought that's not my.
I'm done.
Yeah.
Been there, done that.
Yeah, that's enough fun for the day.
Yeah, but sometimes, I mean, you asked about, entertainment. I read in a book someone who claimed to have been a seasoned intelligence officer and said, and wrote, that she didn't carry chalk because you take a chalk mark, say Aldrich Ames, one of the biggest traitors to the United States who worked for Moscow and got many people killed. He was a CIA officer. His handlers, his Russian handler would take a piece of chalk and just walk by a mailbox or a wall and make a mark. And then Aldrich Ames, later that day would be out walking his dog, walk by, and that would be the signal, the chalk mark that he was supposed to meet his handler. Well, this author wrote, I don't carry chalk because it's not, it's a piece of spycraft, I'm thinking, or spy tool. Well, people with kids carry chalk, but okay. So she claimed that she carried Rolaids, for upset stomachs, and that she used those because that would be less alerting. I was so incensed by this. I was in New York City. I went out and bought Rolaids and I tried it myself. I was on the Upper West Side. I'm like, this does not work.
That's
So,
funny. Oh my God.
Holly, yeah.
Laura, yeah, before we wrap up, what's going to be keeping you busy? I mean, other than keeping on top of issues and in terms of projects, anything like that?
I'm writing a book, a self-help book for women, for ambitious women to use lessons learned in the CIA to break through their setbacks and achieve their goals. So that is keeping me really busy. I actually joined a writers group just to keep me disciplined. It's my first book, so this is...
Well, that's exciting. We have to bring you back once it's out.
I would love to. I've got to say, I've always admired authors. I have a heightened respect now because it's hard. I mean, I love it, but it is not the same thing as writing 1,000 or a 500 word article. So that's keeping me busy. Working for clients, commenting as much as possible on the geopolitics. I, of course, am watching domestically, I'm watching the classified document case with former President Trump. I think that's an incredibly important case. Going hiking later on this summer. That'll be good.
That sounds like fun.
There's one thing I wanted to say before we break that I think that national security is a wonderful career for not just men, for women as well. And particularly this generation, it's wide open. There are lots of women in leadership positions. And I think that women have also started to assert some changes in the culture internally in the security services. It's not perfect, but it's starting. One thing I would say, though, and I would ask women and men in a younger generation, not that I'm, 100 years old, but keep a sense of humor. I mean, and this is actually one of the things that I think is, I started to write an opinion piece, but it hasn't really developed correctly. Losing our sense of humor as Western culture, as Western cultures, and in particular American cultures, that is detrimental to our national security, both domestically and internationally. Part of the attraction to Americans is that we can laugh. And so, I don't like the phrase political correctness because it carries all sorts of baggage, but to be an effective case officer, an effective operations officer, internally and externally, gotta be able to laugh because things don't always go right. And also, it's important to have tolerance for older generations that came up under a different culture. And I'll give you, and I'm not making any excuse for harassment. There's zero tolerance for that. And I saw very little of that sort of blatant wrongdoing in my government career, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But you have to be able to laugh, not just at yourself, but tolerate. For example, older men think it's polite to say, "You look so pretty today." If one of my peers said, "I'm really pretty," I'd say, "Oh, you're cute too." But it's not meant as an insult. It's meant as a compliment and to be polite. So I don't know.
That's another episode. We should do an episode on women's empowerment and how it's changed the genders as well and evolution. I think we're going to do an episode like that, maybe a panel, and we could bring you.
I would love to be part of that.
I think that would be a good one to talk about because there's been a lot of gender issues and how
definitely
a lot of the dynamic between men and women as well.
And thanks for the reminder, Laura, about the humor, because I'm just writing a CNN opinion piece just now, and I got to tell you, one of the things I put in there was that's one of the things that keeps us going here with my friends day after day after day with what's going on around us, all the missile strikes, is the humor, the laughing. It's amazing what it adds. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. And I so admire you for being there, Michael. I mean, it's not easy,
Yeah.
and you're doing a service to all of us who are not there, and to the Ukrainians, but also to the rest of the world. The first time I worked in a war zone was in Kosovo, or Kosova, as you Kosovars say. And it was the first time I had seen a civilian corpse, a human being who had been assassinated on the side of the road. And I was so troubled, obviously. And I called a friend back in the States who at the time was an Army officer and had a lot of experience in military engagements and combat. And I said, how do you deal with this? How do you, keep going? And he said, you have to have a sense of humor to know when to laugh. You don't laugh over the corpse. You allow them, obviously, he said, you allow yourself to have a moment of sorrow and horror. And then later that night, you try to find some humor.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's all about balance in life.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Laura, thank you so much on behalf of myself, Melissa, our listeners. We salute the work you're doing, the passion you bring it, the humor you bring as well.
Thanks.
And we'd love to, have you back once the book comes out and talk more about that as well. And on the panel, Melissa mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I'm really honored to have been invited, and I'm excited to see your future episodes.
Well, that was an absolute pleasure and honor for me as well.
Thanks.
I could talk to you for hours.
Likewise. And you know what? I'm hoping to come out to LA in a couple months. So when I do, I'll let you know.
Let me know. We should grab coffee or maybe a glass of wine.
That would be great. I'd love that.
All right. Well,
Great.
you have a good day. Take care.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
Thanks, Laura.
Bye.
See you.
Bye. Thanks.
So, Michael, it was an absolute pleasure to have Laura Bullman on the show. And thank you so much for bringing her. And what an amazing woman she is.
Yeah, she really is. She's done so much. She's full of energy. She almost like pops out of the screen. And I really loved her message there at the end, because remember when we were doing stuff during COVID, we'd remind people to keep in touch. But I think the message there was also to keep a sense of humor about things in this age of political correctness.
Light and balanced in life.
And
all right, well, let's just wrap up. I think we are gonna now keep going. We're gonna have less episodes than we usually do on the monthly basis, but we're prepping already new shows, and we'll update you guys about everything we're doing. And that's going to be exciting, because it's going to be even more than it was before. We're going to spice it up. We're going to bring different guests, different subjects. There's a lot to talk about right now. We cover a lot of dark issues. We always keep it light at Global Impact. So on that note, have a great day. Michael, have a good night, because you are in Ukraine. And stay safe, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Stay safe, everyone. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.